going to be around Kyrie Irving. The trade finally going down. He's headed to Dallas. Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, and future first rounder in return. However, it seems like the Brooklyn Nets are on the phone to try and get a third team involved. Spencer Dinwiddie might not even make it to Brooklyn. The latest rumblings that it is Toronto on the phone, that they are trying to get a deal for Fred VanVleet over the line that will send Dinwiddie up north of the border and pair Fred VanVleet with Kevin Durant, which would be a really interesting squad, I think, that they would have assembled in return for Kyrie. So this, for me, really one of those weird, I think, or rare occasions where both teams can say they've come out on top. And I don't understand the trash talking going Dallas's way here as to why they acquired Kyrie Irving. I think that the why is just so self-explanatory. They needed a second superstar alongside Luka Doncic, period, and they've got one now. And ultimately, they're better placed now than what they were a week ago to make any sort of meaningful run in the West, and to also make any meaningful strides going forward with the roster, and to be able to actually construct it in a meaningful way that allows them to sort of best get the strengths of both those superstars to the forefront without having to necessarily sacrifice too much defensively. So obviously I do agree that losing Finney-Smith in particular is pretty big on the defensive end, largely because of the fact that he is their best on-ball defender by quite some margin. Defensive wings are such a sought-after commodity in the league right now. But again, this is a team that has been bottom 10 in basically every defensive metric this season for the entirety of the campaign so far. They've shown no signs of turning that around. And yet, we're still trying to hang our hats on the fact that losing Finney-Smith is somehow going to make the Dallas Mavericks worse despite getting Kyrie Irving. And I think, the simple fact is it doesn't matter what you think of Kyrie off the court. Judging purely from an on-court impact, he is still a top 15 player in the league for me. Top 20 player at worst, I think, for most people's lists. What he can do offensively in terms of scoring the basketball is scary at times. And you pair that with Luka, and I think that this offense has the potential to be better than the one that featured Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving together in Brooklyn, for the simple fact that I'm not saying Luke is necessarily a better player right now than Durant, but I think he better complements Kyrie Irving because of what he can do with the ball as a playmaker, what he can do as a scorer, and the pressure that he puts on defenses. He can play in the post, he can get to the rim, he forces defenses to have to collapse, and he can make the right pass basically every single time. So I do understand the question marks around the fit, but it's the same as, when we saw Chris Paul join James Harden in Houston and everyone said there's only one ball, this isn't going to work. It worked. I mean, if they didn't miss a record 20 plus 3-pointers in a row against Golden State, they would have been in an NBA Finals and potentially had a ring to their name. So it works. I think superstars make it work. And even with two guys who are high usage, who like the ball in their hand, we saw Kyrie play alongside Harden as well in Brooklyn. I mean, we didn't get a large sample size there for sure, but he very much accepted his role as essentially the shooting guard. James Harden was the point guard. James Harden had the ball in his hand. Kyrie was able to just inject himself where need be. And if he again takes that role in his stride, then this offense is super scary. What the space that he's going to be able to operate in the mid-range, like I said, just the complementary piece that Luka provides to him versus Durant. Durant's an excellent scorer, fantastic scorer, but it was very much a case of your turn, my turn in Brooklyn, where they would both operate in the mid-range, both could put enormous pressure on defenses, play isolation. Again, it's going to be a case where there's a lot of ISO ball between him and Luka Doncic, but at the same time, the difference being the pressure, I think, like I said, that Luka can put on the basket and inside the paint, that's going to provide Kyrie with all this open space around the mid-range to operate, especially on the perimeter, of course, as well. I don't think these Dallas shooters are going to ever have to deal with contested shots from deep again when you have these two guys on the floor together. They're going to be able to create so much separation, so much pressure provided on defenses to have to make decisions that ultimately you have two very high IQ players that can pick apart your teams in half court sets. So I get the concerns, but I am very strongly of the opinion that Dallas is immensely better now with Kyrie, not just in the short term, but the long term, if of course they are able to sign him to stay on board and to then build the roster around these two superstars as opposed to just, just the one superstar and having to fit sort of, round pegs into square holes per se. I think as well there was a very clear understanding that they wanted to get off of the contracts of Spencer Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith, where they're not necessarily team-friendly contracts when you're trying to build championship rosters from the ground up, essentially. And I think that's the situation that they had found themselves in, where they were valuable commodities in trade pieces and assets that they can use in trade situations like they have done. But they aren't necessarily guys that are going to elevate your team in a meaningful way when, you're clearly lacking a second star. So just the domino effect, Christian Wood now becoming a third option is a scary proposition as well. Like I said, the scoring potential for this team on offense is as good as any team in the league right now. I think, they'll be right thereabouts to Denver and Boston in terms of their offensive efficiency. Big question mark is, can they make it click in such a short period of time? We don't see teams make trades at this point of the season and have it all fall together and in line before the postseason. So, like I said, the pressure now for, I think, Mark Cuban, that front office, is going to be, can they tie Kyrie down to a long-term deal? And then what can they do to fill out the roster in the offseason? But, it's a trade that had to be done. I cannot for the life of me work out why people think that the Mavs made a big mistake here. They've been screaming for a superstar. It was literally 2 weeks ago where you log on Twitter and everyone is screaming for a superstar alongside Luka Doncic, and now we've got one, and apparently it's the worst possible outcome in the world, and it just makes no sense to me whatsoever. I understand, like I said, the off-court drama that Kyrie might bring to the table and the potential tension that he brings to locker rooms at times, but at the end of the day, you don't win championships in the NBA without superstars. You need superstars on the roster. They now have two superstars on the roster and can actually start to make the right moves, I think, around, like I said, these two guys in order to take the right steps in the right direction, because otherwise it was going to be too much Luka ISO ball, and one guy cannot win you things in the NBA playoffs period. You need two guys at the absolute minimum these days. So I think a big win, obviously, for the Mavs here. Like I said, you look at the on-court numbers that Spencer Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith had both this season and last season. They're not really losing much at all, like I said, aside from Dorian Finney-Smith's on-ball defense in the playoffs specifically. But that's going to be an issue that obviously that Jason Kidd will have to sort of scheme for when the time comes. But Kyrie Irving's on-ball offensive metrics as good as basically any scorer in the league. I'm still just a big believer in this trade being far more beneficial for Dallas than what I think the wider public seems to be assuming. So for me, before we sign off, I think I'm not necessarily going to be in a rush to bet Dallas to win championship, to win the Western Conference this season. The roster is still flawed. There is absolutely no debating that whatsoever. But they are just in a far better position having another superstar on the roster than what they would be otherwise. So let's sign off there and leave it at that. I think that the next step, obviously, is going to be what happens in Brooklyn. Obviously, a lot of talk around Kevin Durant's future there. The Nets are sort of scrambling now to try and build a roster around him. They maintain that he's still going to obviously stay there and that they do have the pieces to facilitate him in a meaningful way. As much as I like the trade and the return that they got, because it's obviously impossible to actually get true value for a superstar who has publicly admitted to wanting out, and then of course coupled with the fact that he is on an expiring contract, means that they're limited in what they can do. But I do think they got a good return, but at the same time, that roster as currently constructed with Kevin Durant And then the next best pieces being Spencer Dinwiddie, Nicholas Claxton. That's not a team that's going to win the East or even compete with any of the top three teams, in my opinion, around them. So they still need to make something pretty drastic happen. Even if they do somehow push that deal for Fred VanVleet through for Dinwiddie, I still don't think that's enough to really elevate the team into genuine championship contention. In which case, maybe they do get pressured into having to move Durant before the deadline as well. So that obviously will have pretty big repercussions around the league. So looking forward to seeing how the rest of this trade deadline plays out. I think that there's going to be plenty on offer for a lot of teams. There's going to be a lot of buyers looking to try and improve rosters in big ways and just small ways as well. So a lot to look forward to in the NBA this coming week. Let's just leave it as Dallas were a winner in this trade, and I think Brooklyn as well were a winner in their own right, getting back what they did for that circumstance and situation.